For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sanel Dlamini. A well-renowned author, Mandla Langa, joins me to discuss a book he co-authored with Nelson Mandela titled Not Linger, The Presidential Years. How did you feel when you were entrusted with such an amazing task of finishing former SA statesman Nelson Mandela's work?
When I was asked to finish the memoirs of Nelson Mandela, I had a mixture of emotions. On the one hand, I was elated. I was very, very happy. And I was also honored. But at the same time, I was also very intimidated because this is possibly the world's most important and recognizable and respected and dignified icons. And so it was a task that I had to treat with a lot of care and respect. Yeah.
How is this book different from the popular book Long Walk to Freedom?
Well, this book is about Mandela's, Madiba's, the presidential years. The Long Walk to Freedom ends just when he starts to take the oath, I think, and that's when he talks about the fact that there are many of these milestones and many of these mountains he needs to climb. But this is about his years as the president, and it's about the record of his craftsmanship, statesmanship, and how he handled the difficult first 5 years of a democratic South Africa.
At Madiba's memorial, the world witnessed two powerful leaders, former US President Barack Obama as well as Cuban President Raul Castro, greeting in public. Do you think this book will be able to remind our current leaders, especially the African National Congress, of what Madiba aspired for South Africa?
I'm hoping that the book does jog the memory of our leaders, especially in the ANC, because that is the movement for which Madiba went to prison for, fought for, and he was as a member of the ANC that he passed on. But I would wish it's also a book that can, whilst jogging the memories of the leaders, to remind them of what it means to be in a leadership position. That leadership is for the people of South Africa. It's something that's entrusted upon you to lead the people, for them to remember that. And also, but it must also be a book for the people of South Africa, for the public, to remember their greatness at a specific time.
In Chapter 6, which deals with the presidency and the constitution, it narrates of how Nelson Mandela respected the court of law despite holding the highest office in the land. What made him a unique figure?
Well, when he was in prison, even at the time when he was beginning to think about the possibility of having talks with the regime, with the Nationalist Party regime, he had in mind the most important eyes on his prize was to come up and have a democratic state. And that democracy is underpinned by the Constitution. And the judiciary is one of the most important aspects of that Constitution, of that state. And so he volunteers to stand for a very long time on the dock, you know, when the trial is going on, when he was on trial, because he wanted to prove to the world and to South Africans that even though he was a president and could have possibly sent lawyers to represent him, he decided to be there as a symbol, as a show that the judiciary is very important and he respects it, because he was one of the architects of the new judiciary of South Africa.
Mandla, what do you think he will be saying about the current state of our country?
I think he would be enjoining the South Africans to remember what he said a while back, when he said that if the ANC starts to do things that were inimical to the will of the people, in the same way that the National Party was doing things that were inimical to the will of the people, then the people must rise up and, take over or really caution the ANC. And I'm sure he would be saying the same thing. He would be advising us to make sure that we get back to remembering the democratic principles.
For anyone who has not read the book, what would you say they are missing out without telling it all?
I think they would be missing out on what made Madiba the man he was, the leader he was, what were the influences, what were the books he read, and the people he consulted. They would be missing out on one fundamental thing, and that is we all know that he was a very, very single-minded person, but they would miss how that single-mindedness manifested itself when it came to solving problems, not only the problems of his own country, but the problems of on the African continent, and how he tried to be a moral force even in the problems that were facing the globe.
When I heard about this book, I thought the project somehow brought you closer to Madiba. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'm a novelist, and my job as a novelist is to get into the skin of the subject, to empathize, to go in and try and think exactly how that subject must have thought. So for me, that was the most interesting part. And I had to tell his story, which I think is one of the most important stories of our time.
Is there any interesting information that you also discovered for the first time about this iconic leader?
Well, I discovered a lot of things that possibly are known, but the extent to which those things happened for me was a discovery. For instance, the fact that he was sometimes angry at some of the leaders, some of his interlocutors, including de Klerk, but he would never humiliate them in public because he felt that these people were representatives of certain constituencies. And that was, for me, a masterstroke in statesmanship.
In the book, I read that he is the person who always wanted to finish what he has started, but sadly, he didn't finish this book. How do you feel about doing this for him?
Well, as I said earlier, I feel humbled and I feel elated and I feel also relieved that the project has come to an end. And I do believe that it's a project that needs to be somewhere along the line translated into languages that can be accessible to the people of South Africa, and it's already been translated into about 12 other languages. And so I feel that it should also be translated in a manner where our students, our kids, people in high school can start to know more about Mandela at the time when he was a leader, he was a president of the country, and to know more also about what is needed to lead a very, very complex democracy like ours.
And lastly, do you think that the young leaders in our country will benefit from reading this book?
I think most of the young leaders, even those who are no longer in the ANC, have a lot of respect for the ANC at the time when the ANC was led by Nelson Mandela. And I think that it would be of inestimable value to them to read and to understand what it means to lead.
That was Mandla Langa speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about the book titled Not Linger, The Presidential Years.